Hello, I'm Sofia Canauti and this is How to Discern, a series of short video essays where I deal with key issues in the media realm, in the political realm, that we find it difficult to discern, and that maybe even this confusion leads us to very bad decisions, perhaps voting decisions and generally political decisions. And I use the work of Cornelius Castoriadis, of Hannah Arendt and of Stuart Hall, of other media theorists and other political theorists, hoping that this reaches the students and the public perhaps even. Now, it feels a little bit narcissistic having to say my name all the time, but I'm told it's necessary and perhaps even polite. So in this segment I want to talk a little bit, I want to kind of take us through steps, and I want to start by talking about the difference in Hannah Arendt's work between society and the political sphere. There are historical reasons, I think, that very often in her work, historical in the fact that she talks about history a lot, she uses historical facts, and she kind of goes through history. There are historical reasons for the fact that when she talks about society, she talks about good society, in inverted commas. What does that mean? That means that we have a stratified sphere of different strata, that it's difficult for you to move from one to the other. And it resembles a family, like a father being a totemized individual and never sharing his power with his children, for instance. And therefore the decisions belong only to the father, depending on how power is really shared in this stratified realm. In juxtaposition to that, when she talks about the political sphere, she uses it in Aristotelian terms, as Castoriadis does as well, I think, in my interpretation. So that means that this is a realm where people can meet up and they're equals, and they negotiate things and they discuss things and they take decisions together for their future and for the future of others, depending on, because it's not necessary that everybody would want to take part in those discussions and deliberations. But the point is that you may take part in those things, and there are no totemized individuals and no totemized positions. Yeah. So that's one very important difference. Moving from that is to see how different appearances are in society and appearances in the public realm, in the political realm. So when she talks about appearances in society, she talks about it the same way we kind of look down upon it nowadays, seeing it as something hypocritical. She talks about the shallowness of appearances in society. But when she talks about appearances or phenomena in the political realm, she talks about the visibility that is absolutely necessary for us to be political people, for us to be political beings. For the political realm to exist at all, you have to be visible. The example I used in the postgraduate class at the Athens University, let's say you are in a class and you have, I used Eleni, hi Eleni. If you have a student that's called Eleni, and Eleni doesn't like your class and she doesn't like the lecture, unless she actually gets up and says so, unless she explains what's happening, there can be no difference to the rest of the people in the class, no difference to you who are teaching, no difference to her. So there's no effect. And it could go either way, of course. It could be an effect towards something worse, and it could be an effect towards something better. But there's no effect unless she stands up and says, unless she makes things visible. Yeah? In Arendt's term, unless there's action and speech. Or action or speech, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure how definite the end is there. But this is a matter for another discussion. So what is political is the visible and that which changes things for the whole of society, if you like, or the whole that people that are present there. Which brings us to, and the discussion at the postgraduate degree was that, in that class, it brought to mind a discussion I had with a colleague that visited the University of Cyprus at my invitation, a British colleague. It was last year. And we talked a little bit about the Vietnam War, and I played a little bit of a devil's advocate there, and I said, well, what do you have to say about the fact that all those protests about the Vietnam War didn't lead to the end of the war, and it went on for so many years in spite of the protests. And of course we discussed things, and it went on as one might expect, and we both realized that you actually change yourself with the protests. It's not just your aim that is visible through this. And Arendt would say it's not just your aim, but the principle, even though your aim is not kind of achieved at that point, the principle shines through. And if you think about it, it really makes sense, because we're not children demanding things. It can't be that our aims are always happening, you know. But the principle of the act always shines through. And that brings us a little bit to what Castoriadis would talk about in terms of mores, when he says that what's important is the mores of the land. And I really think, and I've read that elsewhere, I think as well, you wouldn't have a black president in the US if you hadn't had those protests about the Vietnam War in the 60s and the 70s. You wouldn't have the first woman running for president if you hadn't had those protests. What they did, in spite of not achieving their expressed aim, what they did was they allowed the principle to shine through, and they changed the mores of the land. And Castoriadis says that you could have a constitution that changes every day, you know, so many times in so many countries in the world. You could have written laws, but what really stops people from killing each other in the streets is the fact that other people will kind of jump in and they will say, hang on, you may not do this. This is not something that's allowed. So the mores of the land are more important than any written law. They're more important than the constitution. And this is what we change with political action. I want to add a little bit here, which comes from ancient Greeks, that you are only free in action. You can't be free inside. This is not political. It changes nothing. There's no effect of this. You are only free when you act and when you speak out. And I'm thinking also of something relevant, of Kavafis, who's one of our greatest poets in Greek, who says in one of his prose works, he says, if you are against the death penalty and you are around people and you talk with people and there's somebody in favor of the death penalty, speak up. Even though you might be a coward, go on and speak up and say that it shouldn't be so, that there's no moral reason why there should be a death penalty, even though you might be a coward, because somebody who's not that much of a coward might listen, might hear you, and that will change the essence, the atmosphere around the issue and around the world, really. So, yeah, thank you.